The Lord Commander Ryan's shrewd adjustments to the administrative protocols had genuinely eased the burden on countless officials, particularly those who excelled at execution but struggled with written reports. Submissions over the past few days were notably leaner, their core issues immediately apparent. Even those who once sought to leverage minor infractions for personal gain now hesitated. As a result, High King Ethan appeared unusually content, showering Lord Commander Ryan with further accolades. This time, there was no dissent from the gathered advisors. Many upright civil servants, disregarding notions of false modesty, submitted their own petitions praising Lord Commander Ryan's actions as beneficial to the realm, a legacy for generations to come. Lord Commander Ryan welcomed praise for his military victories, but political commendations always unsettled him. He would rather tend to his magnificent stallion than endure the effusive compliments of the assembled officials. High King Ethan, therefore, entered the council hall alone. Soon after he took his seat, Chief Justice Arthur knelt before him, attempting to decline an honor. He was not the first, he was, in fact, the ninth. Not a single senior advisor had volunteered for the task. The honor in question was presiding over the Federated States of Aurelia's inaugural federal selection trials. This position was considered a great opportunity because the head administrator of any such examination was regarded as a mentor by the successful candidates. These newly certified public servants would become their protégés, establishing valuable connections for their future careers. Why, then, were they all declining? The answer was simple. This was the first federal selection trials in the young kingdom's history. The top laureate would be Aurelia's first-ever valedictorian. Many advisors had ambitious family members participating, and to avoid any hint of impropriety, they had to recuse themselves. This presented a significant challenge. Minor officials lacked the necessary gravitas, while deserving senior figures were unwilling to take on the role. Who, then, possessed both the stature of a senior official and no close family ties to any of the candidates? The answer was clear. Lord Commander Ryan firmly declined the position, stating that he already oversaw a demanding military division and questioned the idea of him also cultivating a network of protégés. He felt that being accused of political maneuvering was enough without also acquiring a reputation for controlling a significant power block within the new administration. The High King patiently explained that there was truly no one else suitable. Ryan suggested mystic advisor Silas. High King Ethan chuckled, noting that Silas held no official position and thus could not serve as head administrator. He mused, however, that it was time for Silas to re-engage with public service, though not in this specific capacity, as the timeline was too tight. Ryan pressed the High King, asking if he truly understood the examination process. Ethan, somewhat surprised, confirmed that he did. Ryan then vividly described the conditions. Numerous candidates crammed into small, coffin-like cubicles for 3 full days, emphasizing the inevitable lack of cleanliness. It became clear that Ryan's reluctance stemmed not only from avoiding political entanglement, but also from a personal aversion to the unsanitary environment. Ethan found himself at a loss for words. Ryan then proposed Liam, Ethan's son, suggesting it would be good experience for the young prince. Ethan considered this for a moment. He hadn't thought of Liam previously, not because he overlooked his son, but because Liam was still quite young and lacked the polished experience of those from established influential families, despite his diligent studies and rapid progress. Ethan harbored no doubts about Liam's capabilities, but as the High King's eldest son, any misstep could have repercussions far beyond a single examination. However, Ryan's weakness lay in his soft spot for those he considered his own. High King Ethan sighed, explaining that Liam's youth made him vulnerable in a process that was, despite its meritocratic ideal, a nexus of competing influences. He proposed taking the titular role of head administrator himself, with Liam and Ryan serving as co-deputies, and asked Ryan to accompany Liam and guide him. Ryan understood. It was a way for Ethan to protect his son from potential machinations. Relieved to avoid the primary role, Ryan eventually nodded his assent. The following morning at court, High King Ethan formally announced the appointments. With the High King himself as head administrator, the successful candidates would become directly associated with the crown, elevating their prestige. There was no objection. Officials eagerly anticipated the results, many planning to rigorously prepare their own kin for the trials. As the session concluded, Liam formally approached Lord Commander Ryan, expressing his honor at working alongside him and apologizing for any potential imposition. Despite Liam's royal status and Ryan's role as a subject, Liam's deference was notably humble, drawing subtle glances from nearby officials. Ryan smiled, assuring Liam that his courtesy was appreciated. Liam mentioned needing guidance on certain unclear matters, and the two walked towards the regent's quarters, conversing. Advisors murmured amongst themselves, most reflecting on Lord Commander Ryan's considerable influence. High King Ethan, en route to the cabinet chamber, watched the pair in the distance. Liam, earnest in his questions, and Ryan, responding with an approachable demeanor, followed by a retinue of royal guards. Ethan internally savored the scene, perceiving a tender, almost familial, interaction. Chief Minister Marcus, observing Ethan's distant gaze and faint smile upon entering, gently cleared his throat to remind him of the pending business. Ethan, momentarily chagrined by his own distraction, composed himself and declared it was time to commence the session. The cabinet and senior advisors proceeded methodically, addressing urgent matters one by one. Ethan spoke sparingly. The cabinet chamber was not a forum for his unilateral decrees. His words were generally guiding principles, often listening to his senior advisors before making a final decision or outlining a general direction for further refinement. As midday approached, Steward Miles entered, suggesting a break for refreshments. Miles, known to be close to Lord Commander Ryan, was allowed this casual intrusion. The assembled advisors mentally lauded Ryan for arranging their reprieve. Ethan, initially annoyed by the interruption, softened when he recognized Miles and understood it was Ryan's thoughtful gesture. He agreed, dismissing everyone for lunch, with plans to reconvene afterward. Ethan left the cabinet chamber and headed directly for the regent's quarters. After a pleasant lunch there, he returned to the cabinet chamber for more discussions. Lord Commander Ryan watched High King Ethan's retreating back, then playfully remarked to Liam that his father seemed destined for ceaseless work. Liam offered a faint smile, then, maintaining a composed expression, observed that his father was a diligent and industrious ruler. Ryan gently pinched Liam's cheek, affectionately calling him a little old man. Liam, unaccustomed to such casual affection from adults, shyly covered his face, laughing silently. Ryan felt a pang of sympathy for the remarkably well-behaved child. He resolved to speak with Ethan about the critical importance of a supportive and affectionate childhood in shaping an adult's personality. Lord Commander Ryan, who considered his own upbringing to have been remarkably free and pleasant, reflected on this. While this comfortable interaction unfolded, High King Ethan found himself irritated by another matter concerning mystic advisor Silas. Silas adamantly refused to accept a formal position, resorting to theatrics to avoid it. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, demanding to know if Silas intended to make him appear tyrannical in the eyes of the populace. It was not an exaggeration. Silas was a true hero, having fought alongside Ryan to establish the Federated States of Aurelia. If such a figure declined to serve, it would inevitably lead to public speculation. Either Ethan was stingy with rewards, or he was an ungrateful ruler who mistreated his loyal subjects, making Silas fearful to accept. Silas was genuinely distressed. Having achieved his ultimate revenge, he desired nothing more than to spend his remaining days in quiet astrological studies, offering guidance when asked. He felt it was unfair to deny him such a simple, peaceful existence after his great service. The logic struck Ethan as remarkably similar to Ryan's reasoning in a past life. Ethan, weary of arguing, coolly ordered Silas to return to the Bureau of Celestial Affairs. He warned him not to bother him again, implying that future official orders would come directly, and Silas would be expected to comply. Seeing Ethan's genuine anger, Silas dared not press further. He bowed regretfully and departed. Consequently, the cabinet and senior advisors also avoided provoking Ethan's displeasure, moving through the agenda with unusual speed, eager to conclude all possible business. Evening chimes had long since sounded, yet Ethan showed no inclination to dismiss his senior advisors. The officials anxiously awaited Lord Commander Ryan's intervention. Steward Miles, peering into the side chamber of the council hall, hesitated. He returned to the citadel and informed Lord Commander Ryan that the High King seemed quite displeased. Miles's apprehension was justified. If he, as Ryan's envoy, were met with Ethan's wrath, it would not be a personal slight but a public diminishing of Lord Commander Ryan's standing. Confined to the citadel and lacking formal public justification for his residence there, any such perceived slight could fuel damaging rumors and create tension between the High King and Lord Commander. Ryan, however, did not overthink Miles's concerns. He simply assumed Miles had been intimidated by Ethan. Taking a confidential report in hand, he proceeded to the council hall. He entered calmly, knelt on one knee, and announced that the royal guard had delivered a confidential report which he dared not open without the High King's personal review. Ethan, whose face had been set in a grim expression, struggled to immediately shift his mood. He sternly commanded Ryan to rise. As Ryan approached and handed over the scroll, Ethan opened it to find only 4 words: "Go home for dinner." Barely suppressing a smile, Ethan cleared his throat, closed the report, and declared, somewhat obviously, that Lord Commander Ryan should return to the citadel, where they would continue discussions upon his return. He then dismissed the other advisors, noting the late hour. Ryan bowed to Ethan and offered a polite nod to the assembled officials before departing. The cabinet and senior advisors quickly followed suit, leaving only Chief Minister Marcus. Ethan, surprised, inquired if Marcus was not eager to return home for his evening meal. Marcus offered a wry smile, confirming their mutual desire for dinner, but then added that it had been a long time since he and the High King had truly spoken. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a slight smile touching his lips, asking if Marcus had found time for nostalgic conversation. Marcus chuckled, recounting anecdotes from their past, when Ethan led the Aurelian forces in skirmishes. Ethan listened, occasionally interjecting. They spoke of the humorous moments from their time in the field, such as Marcus's vanity, even after a victorious, soaking wet campaign, when he insisted on theatrically fanning himself, accidentally drenching Ethan. He also recalled Chief Justice Arthur's near drowning in a river during a frantic night march to deliver supplies, leading mystic advisor Silas to jest about Arthur almost becoming Riverbed Arthur. Ethan's face softened with genuine amusement as he listened. Marcus, after sharing 3 or 4 such stories and lamenting his older years' tendency towards nostalgia, respectfully bid farewell and slowly left the palace. The council hall stood empty. High King Ethan's face resumed its impassive expression. He unclasped a small jade token from his belt, softly uttering 2 names, Marcus and Arthur. He ordered for them to be thoroughly investigated. A royal guard emerged from the shadows, knelt, retrieved the token, and acknowledged the command. Lord Commander Ryan waited for High King Ethan to return to the citadel, teasing him about his unyielding work ethic, even noting that Liam had praised his diligence. Ethan remained silent. He discarded his royal robe and embraced Ryan tightly. Ryan, disoriented by the unexpected intensity, playfully asked if Ethan was addicted to such displays of affection. Ethan still said nothing. Ryan raised an eyebrow, shifting in Ethan's embrace to gently press on Ethan's forehead, a familiar gesture from when Ethan suffered from headaches. After a long moment, Ethan slowly released Ryan, confessing he might just be overly exhausted. Ryan, who had earlier gently squeezed Liam's cheek, now affectionately pinched the High King's jaw. He sharply told Ethan that he needn't pretend to smile if he truly didn't feel like it, questioning whom he was trying to deceive. Ethan turned his head, kissing Ryan's offending hand. Ryan always seemed to see through his facade, a near-instinctive understanding that, paradoxically, offered comfort to the High King who was expected to be inscrutable. To have such a companion, what more could he desire? Ethan then ate dinner in comfortable silence with Ryan, his expression still solemn. Afterward, they discussed Liam's education. Ethan's own childhood had been far from ideal, and in a past life, his adopted son, not truly his own, had been raised by another woman to be something he was not. Lacking personal experience or guidance in raising a child, Ryan's words served as a stark reminder that he should strive for a closer relationship with Liam. However, knowing what to do was one thing, doing it was another. How could he become closer to his son? Ryan waved his hand, admitting his own lack of expertise in the matter. Parenting, he suggested, was not something to be rushed. It required careful, long-term consideration. Fortunately, with Ryan and Liam sharing a current assignment, Liam would receive guidance, ensuring he wasn't neglected. Ryan had no objections. Ethan had recently been preoccupied and hadn't pressed him to attend the council hall, suggesting ongoing issues that Ethan preferred not to involve him in. Ryan, respecting Ethan's wishes, did not inquire further. He spent his days with Liam at the Academy of Scholars, collaborating with the head of the academy and other officials to organize the federal selection trials. More accurately, Ryan mostly observed, allowing Liam to take the lead. While Liam diligently organized the exam procedures, Ryan cheerfully engaged in wordplay with Elder Harrison, the Grand Chancellor of the Academy of Scholars and grandfather to a student named Dean. Elder Harrison, a former valedictorian from the previous era, was a revered scholar, his appointment as Grand Chancellor universally accepted despite his advanced age. His handling of his grandson, Dean, revealed a man not only learned but also worldly and adept. Ryan, though uncertain why Elder Harrison was reluctant to fully participate in the exam preparations, accepted the elder's excuse of being too frail. Ryan himself was content to observe, delegating more to Liam and subtly cooperating with Elder Harrison's feigned detachment. If it were solely up to Ryan, he wouldn't have even served as Liam's co-deputy. He believed in learning through mistakes, not striving for perfection from the outset. However, Ryan understood that in this era, the monarchy's image could not be compromised. Thus, after reviewing the procedures and setting the general direction according to Ethan's wishes, he entrusted the details to Liam. Before final implementation, Ryan still reviewed everything as a safeguard. To date, Liam, with the collective wisdom of the advisors, had performed admirably. Ryan observed with a keen eye that Liam's approach to tasks echoed some of High King Ethan's traits, receptive to advice yet discerning, occasionally offering incisive observations that commanded respect. With his concerns eased, Ryan delved deeper into word games with Elder Harrison, who not only excelled at the game but also recounted vivid short stories, occasionally captivating Ryan so much that he forgot to eat. If Ryan forgot to eat, Ethan, already consumed by the darkening political climate, was even less likely to remember. His stern demeanor had made the other advisors increasingly apprehensive, a stark contrast to the harmonious atmosphere at the Academy of Scholars. Why was Ethan's expression growing more severe each day? High King Ethan was waiting for two things: a complete investigation by the Office of Public Integrity and the Royal Guard, and Chief Justice Arthur's voluntary confession. Ethan remained outwardly calm, but once the investigation was conclusive and Arthur still remained silent, Ethan gave the order for the case to be revealed. That morning, Chief Censor Caleb stepped forward, accusing Commander Victor, a decorated war hero, of embezzlement, enriching himself through corrupt means, and murdering Governor Henry, his successor, to prevent Henry from exposing his crimes. Caleb further alleged that Victor had then orchestrated the slaughter of Henry's entire household, framing it as the work of vagrants, thereby deceiving the High King and audaciously petitioning for reinstatement to his former position. Caleb then implicated Chief Justice Arthur, stating that Arthur, as head of the Supreme Court, had trusted the biased testimony of a relative, suppressing Henry's report and indirectly giving Victor time to commit the murders. Caleb declared this a dereliction of duty, making Arthur complicit. As Caleb recited the charges, the assembled officials gasped. When he finished, the entire court, faced with the High King's burning gaze, feared even to breathe too loudly. Arthur, filled with shame, knelt without argument, simply admitting his guilt. High King Ethan was not just disappointed. He felt a profound coldness. What was the position of Chief Justice? He oversaw all legal matters, reviewed all appeals, and presided over complex and significant cases. His duty was to ensure justice, that punishment fit the crime, and that no one was unjustly accused. The Supreme Court, along with the censorate office and the Ministry of Justice, formed the Aurelian legal and oversight system. Anyone holding the title of Chief Justice had to be not only competent but also unwavering in their adherence to the law, serving as an exemplar. It was for these reasons that in both this life and a previous one, Ethan had entrusted Arthur with this crucial role. In a past life, Arthur had served as Chief Justice for 2 decades, eventually retiring due to illness. While he had exhibited minor issues stemming from familial and marital ties, he had never committed an error of this magnitude. Yet, in this renewed life, such a grave misstep had occurred. Furthermore, Governor Henry was a capable official who had successfully brought peace to the drought-stricken Lakeview County. How could Ethan not lament his loss? More importantly, with such a heinous crime uncovered, Arthur had not immediately come forward to confess, waiting instead for the public revelation in court. Thus, the esteemed Chief Justice was stripped of his office and incarcerated by the Office of Public Integrity. The spring rains, rather than bringing renewal, fell with a chilling sorrow. At its core, the case revolved around nepotism. Arthur, caught in its web, was indeed derelict in his duties, though he had been deceived rather than knowingly protecting Victor's crimes. The story circled back to the drought in Lakeview County, which fell within the northern region. The previous governor there was Victor, a former officer who had surrendered to Aurelian forces and was one of its founding heroes. Victor possessed a certain degree of competence, as evidenced by Ethan's immediate replacement of him with Henry in this life, recognizing Victor's unsuitability for governance. Simply put, Victor was a military man, entirely lacking administrative skill. His negligence in governance led to a complaint from the regional censor, resulting in an official reprimand by the censorate office. The punishment included a substantial fine and, under the watchful eyes of the regional censor, a public censure. Victor, a former warrior, could not stomach such humiliation from a civil official. Hearing he could resign, he angrily did so. Henry was appointed to fill the vacancy. Henry took office just as Lakeview County faced a severe drought. Victor, feeling the loss of status after abandoning his official post, began to regret his decision. He sought to find fault with Henry, but to his dismay, Henry proved remarkably capable. He skillfully resolved the drought, maintained transparent accounts, distributed aid promptly, and even received a special commendation from High King Ethan. Even Henry's deceased brother, a former enemy general, was posthumously honored by the High King. This alone inflamed Victor's envy. He was further shocked when Henry, a stickler for details, proceeded to audit Victor's financial records from his previous tenure. Henry's actions were simply part of his duties. Annual reports had to be submitted to the prefect, and if accounts were unclear, they couldn't be processed by the Treasury Department and would lead to investigation by the censorate office. When Victor's informants from the governor's office reported this, he panicked. Why? Because Victor knew the immense scale of his embezzlement. Victor initially prayed for divine intervention, hoping Henry would not uncover the deficit. But such last-minute pleas were useless. Henry not only uncovered the massive fraud but was so appalled by it that he immediately drafted a report and dispatched it to the Supreme Court in the capital. Victor understood. Once that report reached the capital, his life would be forfeit. The reports were handled by the provincial administration, making it impossible to tamper with them. His only option was to influence the Chief Justice, Arthur. Arthur was known for his integrity, making bribery unthinkable. However, Arthur was also renowned for his filial piety. His mother, Eleanor, came from the powerful, influential Stone family. Victor's son, coincidentally, had married the eldest daughter of the Stone family's main branch. Thus, Through a convoluted chain of connections, Arthur's elderly mother learned that a relative had made a mistake, taking a sum of public funds. She claimed the relative was remorseful, but the report had reached her son, threatening his life. Eleanor, considering herself astute, reasoned that her son, a high-ranking official and a founding hero, should easily be able to make a report disappear for a mere sum of money. If he wouldn't help his mother's family with such a minor request, what good was he? To uphold her family's honor and to exert control over her son, Arthur's mother refused to eat, demanding that Arthur show leniency to their kin. Arthur faced an impossible choice: comply and commit dereliction of duty, or refuse and be seen as unfilial. After 2 days of agonizing over his mother's relentless protest, and even seeking counsel from Chief Minister Marcus, whose advice proved ineffective against his mother's continued hunger strike, Arthur finally relented. Perhaps at the moment he decided to neglect his duty, Arthur should have known this wouldn't be the end. But he never imagined that Victor, under Ethan's unyielding rule, would dare to commit such an atrocity. Victor, having taken far more than just a single sum of money, proceeded to target Henry after receiving reassurance from the Stone family. Subsequently, a group of assailants, aided by an inside man, infiltrated the governor's residence, massacring Henry's entire family and setting the office ablaze. Victor then rushed to the scene, feigning shock and immediately initiating a citywide search for the vagrants responsible, stirring up widespread panic about officials being murdered by displaced persons. Victor's lack of administrative skill was evident in his choice to blame vagrants. What were vagrants? They were people who had lost their homes. If this incident had occurred immediately after the kingdom's founding the previous year, the censorate office might not have been suspicious, as many displaced people had not yet been settled. However, from the very beginning of his reign, High King Ethan had prioritized agricultural stability and citizen welfare, encouraging vagrants to return to farming with generous and practical policies. Simultaneously, the Treasury Department worked tirelessly with local authorities to implement a comprehensive household registration system, keeping detailed records to support and manage the populace. After more than a year of concerted effort, Aurelia had largely eliminated large groups of vagrants. If any remained, they were forced to hide in remote areas, as lacking official papers they could not enter cities. The idea of them forming organized gangs to assassinate a high-ranking official within the city was preposterous. Victor's ignorance of current affairs made his deception easily discoverable by the Office of Public Integrity. The case, while brutal, was not complex. Victor's entire clan had been apprehended and was being transported to the capital. The pressing issue for High King Ethan was how to handle Chief Justice Arthur. Chief Censor Caleb visited the palace 3 times a month for acupuncture treatments prescribed by royal physician Zhang, designed to prolong his life. Caleb occasionally forgot these appointments, but Jasper, commander of the Royal Guard, always remembered, often personally escorting him to the royal medical ward if not otherwise engaged. After each session, Caleb invariably tried to sneak off to see his mentor, Lord Commander Ryan, but the citadel was not freely accessible, and the royal guards politely but firmly deterred him. Today, however, he learned that his mentor and Liam were at the Academy of Scholars. Caleb immediately rushed there, and to please his mentor, quickly joined the childish word games, forming a conspicuously cheerful trio with Ryan and Elder Harrison in the Academy's main hall. Lord Commander Ryan had initially commanded respect with his clear intellect, and Elder Harrison was a naturally amiable elder. Having played these games for several days, most had grown accustomed to their antics. But this was Chief Censor Caleb, the fierce and uncompromising official who had dared to accuse the Chief Justice before the High King. Many covertly observed Caleb until Liam gently tapped a paperweight, signaling them to resume their focus. Caleb paid them no mind. He asked his mentor when he planned to return home. Ryan had intended to stay away for a week or two, but Ethan's recent troubled demeanor made him reluctant to leave, so he simply replied, "In a little while." Caleb was visibly displeased, his lips pursed. He rejoined the word game for a few more rounds, then decided he'd rather go home and play with Jasper, and promptly left. Elder Harrison, seemingly unfazed, continued his storytelling with Ryan, Several days passed. The federal selection trials were about to begin, and Victor had been brought to the capital. High King Ethan woke early, roused Ryan as well, and asked him to accompany him to the morning assembly. Although Ryan hadn't attended court, he was well informed, having heard pleas for leniency from Chief Minister Marcus. He knew exactly what was unfolding. Had he not, Ryan admitted, he would have expressed his displeasure the previous night, remarking that anyone would be exhausted by constant demands. Ryan glanced at Ethan in the mirror, then gently clasped the High King's hand as Ethan combed his hair, saying nothing. Ethan, feeling comforted, lowered his gaze and caught sight of fresh marks on his skin from earlier, a slight flush rising to his cheeks as he cleared his throat, his face relaxing slightly. When the advisors arrived for the morning assembly, they found Victor, burdened with heavy restraints and weeping uncontrollably, and Arthur, stripped of his official hat but unshackled, kneeling to one side. No one lingered for pleasantries. They quickly took their places, awaiting the High King's arrival. High King Ethan and Lord Commander Ryan entered together. The officials waited until Lord Commander Ryan stood opposite Chief Minister Marcus before offering their unified greetings. Ryan and Marcus exchanged a swift glance, but before any communication could occur, High King Ethan slammed a report onto the dais. The entire court fell silent. Even Victor's whimpering ceased instantly. Ethan coldly eyed Victor and commanded for the report to be read aloud. The on-duty royal guard obediently stepped forward and unfurled the report on the floor before Victor. This was Victor's petition to High King Ethan, submitted after he had slaughtered Henry's family and blamed vagrants. It began with an extravagant expression of sorrow for Henry's tragic death, followed by an even grander declaration of loyalty, humbly requesting a second chance to serve. This was already audacious, but it was not Victor's peak of shamelessness. At the end of the report, Victor swore he would capture the true culprits behind Henry's death, vowing to execute these vagrants brutally, thus bringing peace to Henry's spirit. Victor trembled like a sieve. Each word read was a slap to his own face, and he knew it would only enrage the High King further. How could he possibly read it? He could only wail, begging for mercy. High King Ethan's brow remained unmoved. He calmly asked if Victor intended to defy a direct order in court. Victor's face drained of color. He shook like a withered leaf in an autumn wind, terrified, and began to read his own damning words. As Victor's voice quavered, Ethan's gaze shifted between him and Arthur. Arthur was consumed by shame, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Murmurs began to spread among the officials, and the more Ethan heard, the hotter his temper flared. Lord Commander Ryan, feigning impatience like the other officials, casually remarked, not bothering to lower his voice, "How utterly shameless." Ryan's interjection naturally interrupted Victor, who, already unwilling to continue reading, prostrated himself, once more begging for mercy. High King Ethan's anger, which had been steadily rising, did not intensify further. Ethan knew Ryan had deliberately interrupted Victor, likely to prevent him from escalating his fury. He slowly composed himself and asked Arthur if he had anything to say. Arthur bowed deeply, confessing that he had betrayed the High King's trust, proven himself unworthy of his heavy responsibilities, and allowed personal bias to lead to grave error. He declared himself deserving of the same punishment as Victor. Everyone could see Arthur's profound remorse. Ethan had expected him not to argue, but Arthur's continued refusal to offer a detailed confession reignited Ethan's anger. It wasn't that a full confession would have spared Arthur, but Arthur had been a trusted advisor since Ethan's early campaigns. Had Arthur sought Ethan's counsel, either before or immediately after his misjudgment, the situation might never have escalated to this point. In other words, why hadn't Arthur confided in Ethan earlier? Was it a lack of trust, or was he simply afraid? Ethan had pondered this for days, and found only disappointment. Turning away from Arthur, High King Ethan addressed the assembled advisors, his voice cold. He stated that the culprits and evidence in the case were clear, and the full sequence of events understood. He then asked them how they believed the case should be concluded. Ethan's words were like water poured onto hot oil. The court erupted in debate. Victor, an outsider military hero with several family ties to the traditional power blocks, could not be openly defended. Advisors vaguely suggested that, given his past contributions, a death sentence might be commuted to a lifetime of punishment. As for Arthur, he was a distinguished hero, a prominent member of the Harrison family, and known to be close to Chief Minister Marcus and mystic advisor Silas, as well as a trusted confidant of the High King. More pleas for leniency were made on his behalf. The lively debate continued until the senior advisors noticed Lord Commander Ryan's eyes were closed and Chief Minister Marcus remained silent. A sense of unease settled upon them. The main chamber gradually returned to a stifling quiet. Ethan calmly inquired why no one was speaking. No one dared to reply. Ethan looked at Chief Censor Caleb. He asked Caleb for his assessment. Caleb, methodically citing articles from Aurelian law and applying them to the case, proposed initial sentences for both men. He recommended Victor be stripped of all wealth, executed, and his clan exiled as a deterrent for murdering a fellow official and deceiving the High King. For Arthur, he identified the crime as dereliction of duty, which could range from demotion to a fine. Given that Arthur had been misled and pressured by his mother, Caleb suggested a lenient sentence according to the statutes, for he was caught between duty and filial piety. Just when the advisors thought Caleb, the madman, had learned to compromise, Caleb shifted his tone. He argued that Arthur, as Chief Justice, had knowingly violated the law. If he were to continue to oversee justice, how could he command public respect? Furthermore, Arthur, a venerated founding official, had allowed family connections to blind him and cause such a catastrophe. If he were not severely punished, how could the people of Aurelia trust their government? The advisors fumed silently at Caleb's direct contradiction of their pleas for leniency, but Chief Minister Marcus felt a growing anxiety. Marcus understood the High King's methods all too well and was dedicated to both Ethan and Aurelia. The moment he learned of the situation, he had angrily admonished Arthur for his foolishness, urging him to immediately confess to the High King. But Arthur, consumed by shame after learning of Henry's family's tragic demise, could not forgive himself and was too ashamed to face High King Ethan. He had simply delayed, waiting for Ethan to send guards to arrest him. Marcus was frantic. He couldn't directly inform Ethan, as that would betray a friend. Yet, remaining silent would be deceiving his High King. Torn, Marcus had sought out Ethan and engaged in nostalgic conversation, hoping to subtly remind Ethan of Arthur's character while also hinting that something was amiss, thus prompting an investigation. Marcus understood Ethan, and Ethan understood Marcus, which was why he had immediately ordered an inquiry. Ethan knew clearly that in a past life, only Chief Minister Marcus and Lord Commander Ryan among his officials had been truly loyal, unwavering in their support. This was an extraordinary feat, not simply a matter of having a loyal heart. Ryan, in a previous existence, had deliberately avoided politics and remained unattached, which simplified matters, and he harbored a personal bias toward Ethan. In contrast, Marcus, at the center of a complex network of family relationships and bearing the weight of his family's prosperity, managed to maintain complete loyalty to the High King. The amount of political maneuvering and personal sacrifice involved was immense. Ethan was not normally a demanding ruler, and he understood how to balance factions. But the critical point was that Arthur was a trusted confidant whom Ethan had placed his faith in, and who, in a past life, had never committed such a grave error. Compared to Marcus and Ryan, Arthur's actions in this case were profoundly disappointing to Ethan. Ethan remained silent, and no one dared to speak. Victor, perhaps driven to madness by the silence or by fear of death, cast aside all caution. He began to wail, invoking past glories. He cried out that he had been the first to pledge allegiance in the early days of the rebellion, reminding Ethan of his critical role in their victories. Ethan sharply commanded him to be silent. Ethan was already displeased by the advisor's pleas for leniency. Victor, having committed such a horrific crime, now dared to invoke his past status as a hero to beg for mercy. This only fueled Ethan's rage. For his personal greed, he had murdered Henry's entire family, and done so within the regional governor's residence, destroying evidence by burning a government building, and then had the audacity to petition for reinstatement. Ethan clenched his jaw. This showed a complete disregard for Aurelian law. These officials showed no concern for the welfare of the kingdom. Ethan finally spoke, his anger barely contained. He declared Victor a treacherous and lawless villain, contemptuous of authority, defiant of the law, guilty of self-enrichment, and fostering corruption through his family. He vowed that neither Victor nor his entire clan would be spared. He challenged Victor, asking if he had not sworn to capture the culprits who had murdered Henry, and to execute them brutally. He would grant Victor his wish. He ordered the declaration of a decree. Ethan began to declare that he would eradicate Victor's entire clan, but was abruptly interrupted. Someone had dared to speak. The advisors saw it was Lord Commander Ryan. Lord Commander Ryan knelt forcefully on one knee, crying out again, "Your Majesty." He did not look at High King Ethan, but bowed deeply. He stated that Victor's crimes were heinous and that he deserved death. He added that the exile of his family, as per law, was a sufficient deterrent. However, he respectfully urged the High King to reconsider the use of cruel and unusual punishment, arguing that it would only instill terror in the populace and undermine the High King's true intention of establishing clean governance and protecting the people. He humbly requested that the High King reflect on this. This was no mere humble request. It was an act of extreme defiance. Lord Commander Ryan was all but directly telling the High King to retract his decree. When had royal pronouncements ever been rescinded? And the High King was furious. Moreover, was it truly necessary to contradict the High King for such a depraved individual as Victor? Was Lord Commander Ryan merely seeking attention, or had the High King's favor made him arrogant? The advisors exchanged glances, anticipating Ryan's downfall. Marcus and Caleb watched Ryan, who remained kneeling, with concern. Yet, despite their unease, they dared not speak further, unwilling to further provoke Ethan. The main chamber fell silent once more. The High King's next words surprised nearly every official present. Ethan, his voice returning to its usual composed tone, acknowledged that Lord Commander Ryan had a valid point. He then issued a decree. Victor was to be stripped of all wealth, executed, and his clan exiled to the Western Territories, forbidden from returning to the capital for generations. Arthur was to be removed from his position as Chief Justice, fined a year's salary, and confined to his estate for self-reflection. Later, in the Citadel, High King Ethan, after a full day of meetings in the council hall, returned with a completely stiff, emotionless face, unable to muster any expression. He sat in his private study, a look of profound distress etched on his features. Lord Commander Ryan sat at another desk, turning the pages of a book, careful not to disturb his High King's brooding. It was less self-reflection and more an unrelenting self-punishment. Ryan sighed internally, unable to remain seated. He walked over to Ethan. Ethan rarely displayed such sorrow. No matter the challenge, Ethan seldom felt truly defeated. Instead, difficulties spurred him to greater effort. In fact, after his ascension, at least in terms of expression, Ethan's life had been easier than his time as a military commander. Everyone expected a monarch to be inscrutable, so his constant impassivity merely conveyed a sense of stability and mystery, with no one suspecting he genuinely struggled with expressing joy or anger. From the very beginning, Ryan had preferred Ethan's relaxed calm over his feigned emotions. Impassivity was perfectly acceptable. But Ethan's strained, self-tormented expression was entirely different from his usual calm. Ryan moved behind Ethan's elaborate chair, carefully unraveling Ethan's hair and removing his jade crown. With gentle fingers, he massaged Ethan's temples and the crown of his head, easing the High King's exhaustion. Remembering that Ryan had specifically learned this technique from royal physician Zhang for his sake, Ethan's heart softened. He leaned into the touch, relaxing, and let out a long sigh. Ryan told Ethan he simply thought too much. Ethan mumbled an indistinct sound, neither affirming nor denying. Ryan, exasperated, chose not to press. As Ethan relaxed, his thoughts drifted from Victor's case to Ryan himself. Days earlier, Ethan had prolonged a meeting. Steward Miles, seeing the High King's anger, had hesitated to enter. He had returned to the Citadel to inform Ryan, who then personally came to the council hall with a confidential report. Ethan had noted this at the time. The following day, during lunch with Ryan absent, Ethan had summoned Miles to inquire about the reason. Miles, surprised that the High King remembered such a detail, felt his reverence for Ethan deepen. He honestly recounted his apprehension, explaining that he feared Ethan's anger would inadvertently diminish Lord Commander Ryan's standing. Ethan had simply said, "Good." Miles's actions were indeed a mark of loyalty and thoughtfulness. Yet, if there were no underlying issue, Ethan would not have remembered, nor would he have recalled it in this quiet moment. Miles's concern was indeed thoughtful. If Ryan were not Lord Commander but Ethan's royal consort, Miles's fear that Ethan might inadvertently slight Ryan, leading to gossip, would be entirely justified. But did Ryan need to seek his standing from Ethan's expression towards a steward? He was the esteemed Lord Commander of Aurelia. Why would Miles harbor such concerns simply when delivering a message? Ultimately, it stemmed from Ethan keeping him within the Citadel, a position without clear formal justification. Ethan, naturally, did not wish for Ryan to be subject to such gossip. It was fortunate that Ryan, being accustomed to power, had never noticed the subtle complexities of Miles's actions. Had he known that many, including Miles, perceived him as dependent on Ethan's favor, he would not have blamed Ethan, but he would likely have bristled, much as he had in a past life. However, allowing Ryan to reside outside in his own estate, apart from Ethan's reluctance to be separated from him, also posed a risk: entanglement in the web of familial connections and political favors. In a previous life, Ryan had been isolated, yet officials had constantly criticized him over matters concerning a rebel general from the Western Marches. In this life, Ryan had subordinates and apprentices, many of whom were outspoken officials who invited controversy. Even staying within the Citadel, he was accused of political maneuvering. Residing outside the palace would undoubtedly escalate such accusations. Victor's case was a prime example. Ryan's hand suddenly pressed harder. He leaned over, looking at Ethan with a dangerous glint in his eye, stating that he felt someone was once again at odds with himself. Ethan grasped Ryan's hand, pulling him to sit on his lap. Ryan, accustomed to Ethan's embrace, settled comfortably, sitting upright and not leaning against Ethan, crossing his arms and giving Ethan a challenging look, as if daring him to explain himself. Ethan loosely held him, his hand resting on the belt that cinched Ryan's robe, defining his waist. Instead of answering, he asked Ryan's thoughts on the case. It was as he suspected. Ryan, exasperated, asked why Ethan was still thinking about a closed case, noting there was nothing more to consider. Ethan clarified, asking for Ryan's opinion on his judgment. Since Ethan pressed for an answer, Ryan grew serious. He reasoned that Ethan's severe punishment of Victor was intended as a deterrent, and forfeiture of property and exile of family was fitting. As for Arthur, his punishment was also perceived as severe, to other heroes. Ryan deemed both appropriate. Ethan, though intelligent and thoughtful, was never indecisive. He knew precisely what his handling of the case aimed to achieve. Ethan insisted, asking for Ryan's personal opinion. He stated that he understood Ryan's intervention in court to prevent him from making an impulsive, cruel judgment. But he wanted to know what Ryan truly thought about Arthur's punishment, beyond the general perception. Ryan looked at Ethan and chuckled wryly. He explained that he could distinguish between what was useful or relevant to Ethan and what was simply irrelevant and unnecessary to say. He reiterated that Ethan's question was meaningless. But Ethan persisted, stating he wanted to know. Ryan shook his head in exasperation. He leaned closer to Ethan, choosing his words carefully. He explained that, setting aside the context of this era, if Ethan asked for his personal thoughts, he would say that Victor's punishment was too harsh and Arthur's too lenient. Victor's sentence seemed too severe because, in his time, a criminal's family was not punished for crimes they did not commit. Arthur's seemed too lenient because, in his time, a position equivalent to Chief Justice would not command such vast social resources and wealth. However, considering the context of this era, he would say that both judgments were largely acceptable, as they conformed to Aurelian law. Victor's punishment was acceptable because the judicial system here represented not just the will of the law, but the High King's authority, and that authority was crucial for the law's legitimacy. Ethan's efforts to cleanse governance required establishing this authority, and such a process inevitably caused collateral damage, an unavoidable paradox of the era. Arthur's dereliction of duty, and the loss of his position, meant far greater consequences for him and his family in this era than in Ryan's own. Therefore, if other officials considered it a severe punishment, Ryan would not argue otherwise. Ryan paused, then continued. He pointed out that Arthur's dereliction of duty was intended to conceal Victor's corruption. In his time, Arthur would have been treated as an accomplice to embezzlement, with the penalty calculated based on Victor's actual stolen funds, plus an additional penalty for dereliction of duty. However, under Aurelian law, if Arthur were tried as an accomplice to corruption, he would face public execution, which was excessively harsh. This was why Ryan had been reluctant to explain. Dissecting it was not only difficult but would sound like grandstanding. Moreover, Ethan tended to overthink everything, and Ryan worried about burdening him further. Ryan looked at Ethan and reiterated that he needn't dwell on it. Ethan had done well, he concluded, so why agonize? Ethan listened, deep in thought, for a long moment before saying he simply wanted to know Ryan's thoughts, whether on major or minor matters. He wanted to know how Ryan thought. Ryan chuckled softly. A moment later, Ryan teasingly reminded Ethan that if he wanted to know Ryan's thoughts, he would ask him. But since Ethan was struggling to understand why Arthur hadn't confessed, why didn't he ask Arthur directly, instead of battling himself? Ethan maintained that he wasn't struggling to understand. Ryan gazed at him with a playful, knowing look. Ethan pulled Ryan closer into his arms, sighing. What was there to misunderstand? He could already guess the reasons, shame and guilt. Ethan could even predict Arthur's tone if he were to speak those words. What was the point? Since Ethan already knew, yet still agonized, what else could it be but misunderstanding? Ryan playfully exposed his High King. Ethan frowned, stating that he merely wished to comprehend where he had fallen short. Ryan placed a finger on Ethan's lips, stopping him. He then spoke, carefully maintaining a calm tone, Ethan that if he continued, he would eventually drive Ryan to distraction. Ethan always sought to find fault within himself. Ryan wished he could travel to the Western Marches and drag Ethan's adoptive father from his 13th concubine's bed to thoroughly question him, to understand the extent of his madness in damaging young Ethan so deeply. Ryan held Ethan's chin, solemnly him that no one was perfect and everyone made mistakes. He urged Ethan not to be so hard on himself, asking if he believed himself to be a deity. Ethan gently caught Ryan's hand, countering that he had never claimed to be a deity. If he knew he wasn't a deity, Ryan pressed, then why did he take all faults upon himself? Ryan's other hand rested on Ethan's shoulder. He lowered his head until their foreheads touched. Only gods, he continued, to whom others pinned their hopes, would shoulder others' sins and suffering without complaint. But gods were a lie, existing only in stories. Ethan was mortal. It was commendable for him to take responsibility, but he couldn't attribute others' wrongs to himself. Ethan understood that Ryan was concerned for him, but he still felt he must have fallen short somewhere. Ethan's way of thinking wasn't solely due to his adoptive father's influence. It was the cumulative, long-term result of all his experiences since the tragedy of his clan's decimation in his youth, including his inherent nature. Moreover, in a past life, Ethan had lived his entire life this way. So, Two sentences from Ryan couldn't instantly make Ethan realize he was being overly harsh on himself. Ethan merely felt Ryan was biased in his favor, caring for him. Ethan began by saying he shared the blame for Arthur's situation, making Ryan want to throw something. But he then added that, since the matter was concluded, he should not dwell on it, which was a more reasonable sentiment. Seeing Ryan's barely contained frustration, Ethan, ever oblivious, added, "Don't be angry." Ryan, feeling both affection and irritation, he was not a man without temper, responded with a cool, mocking laugh. He pointed a finger at the decorative dagger on the table, sarcastically suggesting that if he wanted to avoid anger, death was the simple solution. The words had barely left his mouth when Ethan suddenly clutched him, holding him so tightly it felt as though his bones might break. His face was like ice, and he spoke each word with tight control, his voice deep and stern, telling Ryan to be quiet. Ryan was utterly bewildered. He had merely spoken in frustration, yet it had provoked such a reaction from Ethan. It had been a long time since Ethan had been this angry with him. Ryan, momentarily forgetting his own irritation at Ethan's fierce grip, asked with concern what was wrong. Ethan remained silent. The surge of anger and fear had subsided, but Ethan could not explain himself to Ryan. In truth, after their mutual declarations of affection, and especially their constant companionship over the past 2 years, Ethan deeply felt and remembered Ryan's emotional investment in their relationship, even the subtle shifts in Ryan's public demeanor out of affection for him. Yet, Ryan's absolute resolve in a past life remained etched even more deeply in Ethan's memory. He regretted not having melted down the dagger then. He truly shouldn't have lost control over a mere statement. Ethan felt remorse, and was almost too ashamed to hold Ryan further, letting his hands fall. Ryan, recalling their conversation before Ethan's outburst, tentatively comforted him, surmising that it must be about the nightmare of him dying. Ethan, remembering his earlier excuse, silently nodded. Could the nightmare of his death truly affect the High King this profoundly? Ryan didn't know what to say. He took Ethan's drooping hand and pressed Ethan's palm to his own chest, reassuring him that he was alive. Ethan managed a faint smile. Ryan then took Ethan's other hand, placing it on himself, slowly guiding it beneath his tunic until it touched his skin. Ethan watched as Ryan leaned in, whispering in his ear, asking if he was warm. The Ryan of a past life, so proud he would not remain in the world, now, to soothe Ethan, revealed a captivating allure born of love. No beauty, not even a celestial nymph, could move Ethan more profoundly. Past lives, nightmares, before this cunning fox, they were mere paper tigers. Ethan realized he had risen to his feet. Ryan's clothes lay disheveled on the desk. His eyes held a lazy smile. Ethan leaned in to kiss him. Ryan touched Ethan's strong, handsome nose, noting that it felt cool, like their beloved pet dog, Buster. Buster, by now, had grown into a rather hefty, muscular dog. Since he'd compared him to a dog, Ryan thought it was only natural to test those teeth. Ryan, completely unprepared, arched his back instinctively, like a fish out of water, feigning indignation. Ethan quickly restrained him, kissing him with earnestness, slowly coaxing him back to good humor. Ryan, sensing a resurgence, teasingly used his knee to provoke Ethan, remarking that he wished Ethan's thoughts on other matters were as transparent. Ethan, his voice hoarse, replied that his Lord Commander simply cared for him. Ryan chuckled deeply, then, half seriously, questioned if he truly cared for Ethan. He claimed he did not. Ethan, sensing Ryan had more to say, paused, watching him. Ryan explained that in Aurelia, everyone lived under the shadow of a blade, and that blade was the High King's authority. He emphasized this was a statement of fact, not an accusation. He then leaned in and kissed Ethan's hand, which rested on the table, before continuing. He said that if he were to pity Ethan, the High King, who stood above all others, and parrot polite phrases about the burdens of rulership, it would be utterly disingenuous. Ethan wielded supreme power. While ruling was difficult, he concluded, there was no logic in the fish pitying the butcher. Of course, Ryan continued he was Lord Commander, not a common citizen. But the principle remained. For him, as a citizen, to pity the High King would be sycophancy. For him, as a subject, to pity the High King would be a treacherous conspiracy. Both, he declared, were equally false. Therefore, he did not pity Aurelia's founding monarch. However, Ryan added, Ethan and he were not merely High King and visitor from another world. They were lovers. If he were to cling to his principles, to avoid the psychological burden of perceived hypocrisy, and disregard Ethan's fatigue and pain by not caring for him, that would be an even greater hypocrisy. How could he not care for Ethan? Ryan, having spoken at length, was ultimately trying to console Ethan. Finally, he addressed Arthur's situation. They were all mere mortals, he stated, both of them. To be human, he concluded, was simply to not treat oneself as less than human, nor others as less than human. As humans, they would make mistakes, show favoritism, fear disappointing those they valued, and, after making a mistake, be afraid to face Ethan. Ryan stood and kissed Ethan's chin. He declared that he was Ethan's accomplice. Since Arthur had been stripped of his office, his family's estate was shrouded in gloom. The courtyard was desolate, even fewer sparrows perched on the branches. His branch of the family had risen to prominence first through the influence of his wife's family, the Stone clan, and later through Arthur's own achievements. Now, because of a matter entrusted to them by the Stone family, their son's career lay in ruins. Arthur's father was tormented by conflicting emotions, his heart heavy with anger and worry, and his health suffered, requiring daily tonics. Arthur's mother, Eleanor, was fiercely proud. Though now filled with regret, she absolutely refused to admit fault on the part of her own family, fearing disgrace. Instead, she loudly condemned Victor for deceiving the Stone family, entirely deflecting blame. In ordinary times, Arthur's father might have tolerated this out of old affection. But now, ill and with his eldest son's promising career destroyed, he could no longer hold his tongue. Their argument quickly escalated. The Harrison family estate was not formally divided. While Arthur's 3 younger brothers were not as accomplished as he, they had remained at home to care for their parents during Arthur's campaigns with Ethan. Thus, when their parents argued, Arthur's sisters-in-law seized the opportunity, subtly fueling the dispute with feigned advice, escalating the chaos. When Elder Harrison entered, Arthur and his wife were kneeling before his father's sickbed, desperately trying to calm their parents. A servant rushed into the room to announce the patriarch's arrival. The younger members of the Harrison household exchanged bewildered glances. Their branch, having prospered through the Stone family, had grown distant from the main Harrison lineage, attending only major festivals or ceremonies. The fact that Elder Harrison himself had come was astonishing. Elder Harrison had initially been unwilling to involve himself. He had even shunned the limelight of the federal selection trials. Why would he meddle in the affairs of a distant branch that had alienated itself from the main family? He was old, wishing only to spend his remaining years immersed in ancient texts from the royal library. What use was more wealth or power to him? But this branch's behavior had already implicated Arthur, and if it continued, it could lead to an even greater scandal that would affect the main family. Moreover, Elder Harrison genuinely admired Arthur. Without preamble, Elder Harrison declared they should separate. He stated that their poor judgment was jeopardizing their son's future. If they divided the household, they would still remain family. If they did not, they might not even be able to remain neighbors in the future. Arthur's father looked thoughtful. Eleanor, supported by her 4th daughter-in-law, defiantly stated that, while he was indeed the patriarch of the main family, he had no business interfering in the affairs of their branch. Elder Harrison, without raising his voice but radiating authority, glanced at Arthur and his wife, who stood isolated to one side. He calmly responded that it would be simple enough for him to submit a report to the High King. He then challenged Eleanor, asking if she dared to bear the reputation of a woman who, doting on her youngest children and failing to manage her household, had pressured her eldest son to neglect his duties for her family's sake, thus ruining his career. Eleanor's face turned ashen with fright. She was furious but dared not speak. Having said his piece, Elder Harrison departed without looking at anyone. As Elder Harrison left, her fourth son cried out, seemingly startled. Eleanor, humiliated by Elder Harrison and already simmering with rage, saw her youngest son's fear and her temper flared further. She flung a teacup, shattering it just before Arthur and his wife's feet, indirectly lashing out at them. Arthur's father, witnessing this, also grew angry, demanding to know what she was doing now. Before they could quarrel further, Arthur, disregarding the broken pottery and tea, knelt before his father's sickbed. He bowed, admitting his filial impiety, and requested his father preside over the division of the household. Arthur's wife knelt silently beside him, bowing deeply as well. Within moments, blood seeped through their kneeling robes. Seeing his most dutiful son and daughter-in-law pushed to such extremes, Arthur's father wept. An untended branch would cripple the tree. He decided it was time to divide. As the federal selection trials commenced, talented scholars from across the 10 territories converged on the capital, making Viridian City buzz with activity. Young intellectuals reveled in spirited debates, gathering in coffee houses, libraries, and printing shops, showcasing their wit like peacocks. Students familiar with the capital's inner workings inevitably indulged in court gossip. Recent topics included the unexpected news of Arthur's removal from office and subsequent family division, as well as discussions of beautiful and talented noblewomen. High King Ethan smiled, shaking his head at the circulating rumors noted by his royal guard. The young, he mused, were full of vibrant energy, though sometimes also prone to annoying impulsiveness. Hearing him muse like an old man, Lord Commander Ryan couldn't stop laughing, suggesting that Ethan must have been born 50 years old, for he had never witnessed any impulsiveness from him. Recently, Ryan had either been at the Academy of Scholars or quietly at the Citadel, no longer clamoring to venture out. Especially in the past 2 days, with the exam plans finalized, Ryan remained at the Citadel, bringing Ethan immense peace of mind. Ethan chuckled, remarking that people said wisdom came at 50. If he had known his destiny from birth, he would have hurried to the Western Marches to find Ryan earlier. Ryan's ears flushed, but he still managed a teasing comment about Ethan's smooth words. Ethan countered, stating his words were from the heart. Ryan glared playfully and then departed. And depart he did, leaving the palace. Before lunch, a royal guard delivered a note to Ethan. Your lordship is out for a stroll. Enjoy lunch with your son. So, that day, High King Ethan took his imperial meal to the Academy of Scholars. Liam had meticulously cultivated his father's impassive demeanor, but with Ethan's personal visit, everyone could see the young prince's delight. Ethan briefly reviewed the finalized exam agenda. Liam truthfully stated that Lord Commander Ryan had set the overall direction and Elder Harrison had provided much assistance, but he remained silent about his own efforts. Ethan's heart softened. He praised Liam gently, stating that his young son had done a good job. Liam, surprised his father remembered his old nickname, felt his eyes well up with tears, almost weeping with joy. After lunch, Ethan returned to the council hall for further discussions. They were deliberating whom to send to the Western Marches when a royal guard entered, carrying a parcel, stating it was from Lord Commander Ryan. Ethan glanced outside. He had indeed missed the usual time. Seeing the unexpected parcel from Ryan, the cabinet and senior advisors were curious. Chief Minister Marcus, knowing the appropriate boundaries, rarely asked directly. However, noticing the royal guard suppressing a smile, he surmised it was not a secret and playfully inquired what fine gift Lord Commander Ryan had sent. Ethan untied the parcel, initially wary it might contain something unsuitable for public view. He held it cautiously, but once he saw its contents, he laughed helplessly and fully unveiled the gift. A robust, childlike fabric tiger. It was made of coarse, indigo-dyed farm cloth, embroidered with large, bell-like yellow eyes, soft white fur at the ear tips, and a fierce king character on its forehead, truly impressive. The senior advisors in the council hall roared with laughter. Then, still chuckling, bid the High King farewell to return home for their own meals. Ethan picked up the fabric tiger, discovering a note tucked beneath its belly. It read, 10 to 15 days. Ryan had actually remembered. Ethan, resigned, carried the fabric tiger back to the citadel, despite its questionable dignity for a high king, and ate his dinner with it. The following day, not a court day, Ethan had slept poorly. He awoke as usual, and upon opening his eyes, immediately wondered if he was losing his mind. Ryan had just arrived. He leaned against a tall bookshelf, gazing at Ethan's slightly furrowed, sleeping face. If not for Jasper staying in Lord Commander Ryan's quarters, and the Royal Guard's shift change requiring a small gate to be opened, Ryan would not have been able to enter the palace. Seeing Ethan awake, Ryan walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, asking how many hours he had slept. Ethan immediately clasped his hand, replying that it was sufficient. Ryan raised an eyebrow, questioning if this truly meant sufficient. Ethan, changing the subject, asked why Ryan had sent him a fabric tiger, looking at the charming little creature on the bookshelf. He added that he had been thoroughly ridiculed by the cabinet and senior advisors yesterday. Ryan, unaware of the public unpacking, imagined Ethan holding the fabric tiger in the council hall and laughed. He asked why Ethan had opened the parcel there. Ethan blamed Marcus. After a full night apart, Ethan, unable to resist and perhaps unaware of his own actions, wrapped his arm around Ryan's waist. Ryan, accepting the embrace, leaned back into Ethan's arms, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if they couldn't exist otherwise. Ryan, suppressing a laugh, told Ethan he had initially intended to buy him a plush doll, a soft, stuffed toy made of fabric and cotton, for him to hug while sleeping, assuming Ethan wouldn't know what a doll was. But when he asked Steward Miles about it, Miles was so terrified he knelt, which startled Ryan himself. Miles warned that such an item carried implications of dark magic and was not only unavailable for purchase but absolutely forbidden to commission. Ryan then gently ran his fingers across Ethan's forehead, explaining that he saw an old woman selling fabric tigers on the street, so he bought one for Ethan. Although it was small, it could still be hugged. He then mischievously asked if the High King wasn't using the special gift he bought. Even if Ethan had never seen a plush doll, he could guess it was likely a child's toy. Ethan tightened his embrace, too content to argue. When Ryan continued to tease, Ethan pulled him even closer, holding him immobile, and stated firmly that he only embraced Ryan. Holding him was the only way he found peaceful sleep. Ryan had noticed Ethan's desire to hold him for a while, but he had initially dismissed it as a natural part of their deepening affection. It wasn't until they began sleeping together that Ryan realized it was more than just a typical desire for intimacy. If he wasn't overthinking it, Ethan genuinely slept better when holding him. His own uneasiness this morning, prompting him to visit the palace and finding Ethan sleeping restlessly with a frown, seemed to confirm this. But this meant Ethan still wasn't at peace. Why did that nightmare affect him so deeply? Ryan, troubled, instinctively settled deeper into Ethan's embrace. If they both liked it, how could anything change? The federal selection trials, the first of their kind in Aurelia, were held at the examination center in the southeast of the capital, near the Academy of Scholars. Although High King Ethan held the title of head administrator, Lord Commander Ryan and Liam, the two co-deputies, were the true supervisors, staying within the examination center for 3 full days and 2 nights. Originally, the exams were staggered over several days, but this session was already behind schedule. With numerous tasks awaiting the various ministries and a shortage of personnel due to the dismissal of some officials, there was no time for delays, so the exams were held consecutively for 3 days. Thus, scholars from across the 10 territories, along with students from the Academy of Scholars, were crammed into small, airless cubicles, barely larger than coffins, enduring 3 days of relentless examination. On the first day, The royal guard carried out 3 candidates who had fainted from the sheer intensity of the experience. As supervising co-deputies, Ryan and Liam were required to patrol the grounds. With royal guards overseeing security, frequent patrols weren't necessary, but they still had to maintain a visible presence. After 3 days, Lord Commander Ryan's face was ashen. He first returned to his estate for a thorough bath before reporting back to the Citadel. For several days afterward, officials seized the opportunity to criticize him in their reports, accusing him of disrespecting the academic process and disregarding the High King's appreciation for talent. Ethan was unsurprised by Ryan's behavior, having witnessed similar conduct from him in a previous life. In that past life, Ryan, standing alone in court, had endured half a year of relentless criticism. This time, it was significantly milder. Chief Censor Caleb, as Right Censor, deeply lamented his mentor's disregard for his reputation. He was among the first to submit a report criticizing Ryan's conduct. However, any subsequent officials who issued the most damning criticisms and were found to have committed serious legal infractions were swiftly incarcerated by Caleb. For truly upright officials, Caleb held no grudges. He truly served both as an exemplary subject to the High King and a devoted apprentice to his mentor, and Caleb was immensely proud, boasting to Jasper for several days. What could Jasper do but praise him? Otherwise, the little firebrand would forbid him from staying at the Lord Commander's estate. When the results of the federal selection trials were posted, the entire capital became even livelier. Days later, the successful candidates, having passed the review, cautiously entered the main chamber of the Citadel for a personal interview with High King Ethan, known as the Grand Assessment. They had queued outside the palace before dawn, performed several ceremonial rites led by officials from the Ministry of Culture, and were then given their policy questions. Ethan himself had set the questions, 2 on current affairs and 1 on political strategy. They submitted their responses at dusk. The papers were then reviewed by 8 senior advisors who selected the 10 best to present to Ethan, from which he would choose the top 3. After dividing the candidates into first, second, and third class, a designated official would then formally announce the names. The first class, comprising only 3 individuals, the valedictorian, salutatorian, and third honoree, much celebrated by the populace, received the title Scholar of Excellence. The second class constituted 1/3 of the successful candidates, receiving the title Scholar of Distinction. The third class comprised 2/3, awarded the title Associate Scholar. After the announcement, the candidates were permitted to enter the palace and kneel before the High King in gratitude. The top 3 valedictorian, salutatorian, and third honoree received special treatment, being granted a personal audience inside the main chamber. To have passed the county, prefecture, and regional exams last year, and now the federal selection trials, demonstrated their diligent study even during turbulent times, a resilience worthy of commendation. High King Ethan looked with satisfaction at the young and not-so-young candidates gathered both inside and outside the hall. Some of their names belonged to pillars of the state he knew intimately from a past life. Though still nascent, their futures were bright. The assembled advisors observed the 3 new junior fellows. Some seemed to gauge them as future rivals, others as potential sons-in-law. When their gazes fell upon the third honoree, everyone but Ethan gasped. Despite popular plays, neither the previous nor the current administration had any rule that the third honoree must be handsome. In fact, Ethan had specifically abolished a previous rule, that those with unsightly appearances or any degree of disability, however minor, could not serve in official capacity. In a previous life, a rival official had used this rule to trick Caleb's mentor into joining the Wind Clan, fearing Caleb would threaten his position. Ethan had relaxed this rule to permit minor disabilities that do not impede official duties, making no mention of appearance. Yet, this particular third honoree was truly unforgettable in his homeliness. Prominent ears, large front teeth, eyes that seemed to bulge, dark skin, and a tall, sturdy build, resembling a monstrous black rabbit. This man's name was Ace Handsome. Some officials quietly wondered what his family had been thinking when they named him, given that he had no scars or ailments, implying he was born this way. Regardless of the peculiar glances, Ace Handsome remained utterly composed, earning quiet praise from discerning observers. Ryan, though not one to judge by appearance, noticed the High King's unusually delighted gaze. What was going on? Ethan was, of course, overjoyed. Ace Handsome had been one of his most capable officials in a past life. That evening, back at the Citadel, while holding Ryan, Ethan even chuckled silently to himself, telling Ryan how happy he was today, reflecting on the talents who would lead Aurelia to prosperity. Ryan found the High King's single-minded devotion to Aurelia endearing. He playfully remarked that Ethan's happiness was his happiness. He mimicked the tone of a fawning sycophant, yet infused it with a seductive quality that Ethan found irresistible. Ethan playfully chided him not to tease. Ryan, ever adaptable, questioned if Ethan was unhappy, then pointed downwards, correcting himself, saying it was clearly happiness. Ethan, by then, could no longer resist. After a thorough indulgence, Ethan held Ryan while they bathed. Afterward, he refused to release him, clinging to him for a long time. Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the morning assembly. He remarked that he was truly happy. Ryan, amused, cleared his throat and seriously replied that he understood. He explained that in his previous life as a senior colonel in the Vanguard, only the bravest and most exceptional military academy graduates dared to join him. While he enjoyed thoroughly challenging their endurance, he was always secretly delighted by their talent. Ethan leaned down, kissing the top of Ryan's head, then held him close as they fell into a deep sleep. On the day of the victory parade, Liam, riding a magnificent stallion, led the procession. Although the public was disappointed that Lord Commander Ryan wasn't leading, Liam, despite his youth, possessed an unusual poise and presence inherited from High King Ethan. Dressed in the prince's formal attire, he was undeniably impressive. The stallion also performed admirably, noble and spirited, its black mane impeccably groomed. The citizens whispered among themselves that this was Aurelia's war god's legendary mount, and it certainly commanded attention. Of course, the greatest sensation of the parade was undoubtedly the distinctively unsightly third honoree. Lord Commander Ryan had encouraged High King Ethan to leave the palace. Dressed as ordinary scholars, they sat in excellent seats on the second floor of a coffee house that Marcus had managed to reserve for them. They watched Liam solemnly ride past, both filled with quiet pride. It was, after all, a parental sentiment. Ethan rarely conducted informal inspections, first, because it was a significant undertaking, requiring many royal guards to be deployed discreetly for protection, which was inefficient and costly. Second, any unannounced departure from the palace was documented and inevitably drew criticism from officials, so it was best to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, in this life, with Ryan by his side, Ethan gradually became less constrained, leading to this outing. Though they were dressed as ordinary scholars, their accompanying guards carried weapons at their waists, and they even brought their own tea sets and utensils. Any astute observer would know they were no ordinary people, and thus no one dared to bother them. The proprietor was exceptionally attentive. Their private booth was enclosed by intricate double-sided screens, a testament to the establishment's prosperity. The excitement of the parade had passed. As they sipped their tea, which was of good quality, they resumed their casual conversation about less critical court matters. Ryan inquired why a particular Dashiell family candidate from the Western Marches, who had been assigned a regional post, had been replaced. Ethan, recognizing that Ryan had likely learned this through intelligence channels, simply waved it off, telling him not to concern himself with it. Ryan understood there was an underlying issue and did not press further. As they continued their tea, Ryan used his chopsticks to sample various pastries for Ethan, offering a piece from each plate. Whether it was the flaky butter rolls or the sweet heart-shaped cakes, Ethan's response was always a non-committal acceptable. Ryan, accustomed to this, clicked his tongue in mock exasperation. Ethan, appreciating the gesture, took Ryan's hand and kissed it. Chief Censor Caleb, entering at that moment, witnessed the intimate gesture. Even Ryan coughed awkwardly. Caleb, however, formally knelt, announcing he had a petition. Ethan, sensing trouble, told him to proceed. Caleb presented his argument. Publicly, he stated that Lord Commander Ryan's residence at the Citadel, despite the substantial cost, was a waste of public funds and contrary to the proper conduct of a subject. Privately, he continued, he, Caleb, was an orphaned individual, separated from his mentor, unable to fulfill his filial duty. He therefore implored the High King to grant his wish to properly care for his mentor, to spare Lord Commander Ryan from public criticism, and to allow him to return to his own estate. Caleb spoke with a precise, formal tone that left Ethan speechless. Yet, speechless or not, he had to respond. Ethan gravely stated that he would consider the matter later. Caleb pressed on, demanding to know when it would be reconsidered. Ryan, calling out Caleb's name, told him to obey. With his mentor seemingly not on his side, Caleb angrily threw the candied apple he had been hiding behind his back into Ryan's lap and stomped off. The candied apple rolled, leaving a trail of sticky red syrup on Ryan's clothing and leg. Ryan picked it up, noticing it was half-eaten. With sticky syrup and saliva on his clothes, Ryan's veins throbbed. He slammed his hand on the table, ready to chase after his unruly apprentice and not stop until he had given him a beating. Ethan, suppressing a laugh, held him back, quickly dispatching a royal guard to fetch Ryan a fresh outer robe. Ethan soothed Ryan, promising to speak with Caleb tomorrow. The next morning, at the daily assembly, as High King Ethan took his throne and the advisors offered their greetings, Chief Censor Caleb stepped forward. Ethan had appointed Caleb as right censor specifically for his uncompromising impartiality. Now, he wondered if he had inadvertently set a trap for himself. Caleb deliberately moved slowly to the center of the hall, knelt slowly, and slowly announced he had a petition. The advisors wondered if the right censor, despite his youth, already suffered from arthritis. Jasper, commander of the Royal Guard, also inwardly puzzled. Caleb had been inexplicably upset last night and had refused him lodging, so this behavior was unexpected. Ethan, growing calmer the closer he was to the moment, invited the right censor to speak. Caleb began to say he wished to impeach. The advisors collectively held their breath, fearing they would be the target. Caleb paused for a long moment, then continued. He wished to impeach the High King's adoptive father for his unseemly conduct, having taken 3 new consorts within the past 6 months. As the High King's elder, such behavior was an unsuitable example for the populace and detrimental to public morals. He requested a decree be issued, forbidding him from taking any more consorts. The advisors, upon hearing this, thought it was a trivial matter. The High King's adoptive father had long ago understood that Ethan was not easily manipulated. When Ethan had sent him to the Western Marches for his retirement, he had lived a carefree life there. Despite others' enticements to return to the capital, he remained firmly in the city of Rosemont in the Western Marches, enjoying a life far from royal oversight. As High King, Ethan promoted filial piety and was not ungrateful. He ensured his adoptive father received all due honors, with greetings and gifts exchanged during festivals. Such an important figure naturally attracted favor seekers. Now 60 years old, he had taken 3 new consorts within 6 months, leaving people unsure what to say. Logically, even if Ethan couldn't openly rebuke him, he should at least offer a gentle not to go overboard. But Ethan couldn't say anything. All of his adoptive father's consorts were chosen because they resembled his deceased wife, with similar brows, figures, and even the way they carried themselves from behind. If someone approached him saying they had found a woman with 2 or 3 strong resemblances to her, he would want to marry her. There was a running joke that matchmakers in Rosemont each carried a portrait of the adoptive father's deceased wife. It wasn't a love charm, but a moneymaker. Back in the marshlands, when he married his 3rd consort, Ethan, then the leader of the Aurelian forces, had subtly tried to dissuade him but was silenced by his adoptive father's invocation of his deceased wife. Last year, happy news had even come from the Western Marches. The adoptive father had fathered a child in his old age, truly vigorous in his advanced years. At the time, some had even tried to curry favor with Ethan, publicly praising his adoptive father's profound devotion and enduring remembrance of his deceased wife. Ethan had completely ignored their remarks. How could he respond? Profound devotion, yet a courtyard full of consorts? So, when Caleb made his accusation, Ethan felt embarrassed and inwardly uncomfortable. However, he could only respond by saying that as a son, he could not dictate his adoptive father's marital affairs. Ethan did not say that the matter should not be raised, simply that he could not address it. Thus, while he could not speak directly, the regional censor in the Western Marches could. This effectively supported Caleb. But Caleb's impeachment of the High King's adoptive father was not merely about disliking an old man marrying young women. Caleb, disagreeing, retorted that this was no ordinary marriage. He called it an abuse of power and exploitation of women. Caleb stared directly at Ethan, stating that as the High King's adoptive father, his exalted status and immense wealth were what allowed young women to be forced into the household of a 60-year-old man as consorts by their opportunistic families. He argued it was marriage in name but actually a transaction. He challenged Ethan to claim that these women married him willingly, rather than under duress. Furthermore, he continued to use the banner of remembering his deceased wife while acquiring a courtyard full of consorts. And then to have others shamelessly praise his deep affection. If his devotion was so profound, why did he not remain a widower, embracing his deceased wife's memorial tablet? This, Caleb declared, was a deception, a betrayal of public trust, and a corruption of moral values. Ethan understood. This was a feint, a tactic to hit east by pointing west. Caleb was not truly impeaching his adoptive father. He was clearly impeaching Ethan himself. Caleb first argued that the women were coerced. In Caleb's view, his mentor, Lord Commander Ryan, was being held captive in the citadel by the High King. After all, by normal standards, what hero would willingly bear the stigma of being a favored intimate of the ruler? If it weren't for the High King ambiguously confining his mentor to the palace, how could they possibly be entangled? Surely his mentor wasn't that foolish. Caleb then brought up the adoptive father's deceased wife, further targeting Ethan. While others might be unaware of Ethan's so-called deceased wife, Caleb knew the truth. There had been no such woman in the marshlands years ago. Yet, Ethan diligently nurtured Liam and refused to marry again. Caleb, reasoning logically, believed that this deeply loved woman must have truly existed, but was not of noble birth. Ethan, he deduced, had lied to legitimize Liam's status. Caleb had never believed the rumors that his mentor was Liam's uncle. Those rumors had, in fact, originated from him. But after witnessing the High King kissing his mentor's hand, the persistent rumors that Ryan resembled Ethan's deceased wife, which Caleb had initially dismissed, now involuntarily resurfaced in his mind. If the High King wished to cultivate a reputation for undying devotion, why did he not remain a widower? And why did he drag his mentor into this compromising situation? Caleb was clearly defending Ryan's honor. Before Ethan could respond, the official who had previously tried to curry favor with Ethan by praising his adoptive father's deep affection in court, spoke up. This was Jasper's father. Jasper, as commander of the royal guard, would always personally escort the High King to the morning assembly unless assigned to a critical mission. Jasper's father shot a furious glance at his son, who he had disowned, before stepping forward to protest. He argued that Chief Censor Caleb, burdened with oversight responsibilities, was abusing his authority by making a scene in court over such a trivial matter as the High King's adoptive father's marriages, and therefore the matter needed no further discussion. Jasper, his head bowed, felt his palms grow sweaty. He wasn't concerned about his father, but he suddenly realized that Caleb's impeachment likely meant he knew about the High King's and Lord Commander's relationship, but had failed to understand that they were genuinely in love. The previous year, when Ethan moved the court to Viridian City, Jasper, to avoid an arranged marriage, had revealed he was gay. He was nearly beaten to death by his family. Caleb, furious, eventually, after a few days, publicly declared in court that Jasper was his partner, in front of everyone. Jasper's father, a fellow official, was humiliated by his colleagues gawking and again beat Jasper so severely that he almost died from his injuries. The next morning, before Jasper's father could even glare disapprovingly at Caleb as he passed, Caleb struck first. He straightened his robes, bowed respectfully to Jasper's father, who was of lower rank, and called him father-in-law. Jasper's father instantly turned pale, blood rushing to his head, and he fainted without a sound. From then on, whenever Jasper's father dared to harm Jasper, Caleb would infuriate him to the point of apoplexy. After 5 or 6 such cycles, Jasper remained unyielding. His father, disregarding Jasper's current position, disowned him completely, even removing his mother's ancestral tablet from the family shrine. Thus, when Caleb made his public accusation that morning, Jasper's father naturally assumed Caleb was targeting him again. Caleb, still kneeling before High King Ethan, turned his head to look at Jasper's father. He bowed again and said that his father-in-law should not be angry. He added that while his father-in-law's understanding of deep affection might differ from the norm, and he himself had 4 consorts, perhaps making him sympathize with the adoptive father, Caleb assured him he was not speaking indirectly, but genuinely expressing his outrage. He hoped his father-in-law would not be so suspicious. He should prioritize his health for his young wife and children, and his mother-in-law's tablet, which he and Jasper honored daily, would surely not seek to visit him for old time's sake. Subdued laughter rippled through the hall. Jasper's father's face was flushed crimson, looking as if he might faint at any moment. High King Ethan, sitting on his throne, reflected that this young firebrand played a cunning game, hitting 3 targets with 1 arrow. The High King glanced at Lord Commander Ryan, who stood nonchalantly as if the matter did not concern him, thinking that Ryan's apprentice was truly remarkable. Ryan raised an eyebrow as if to say, "What are we to each other?" Ryan, of course, understood that Caleb was confronting Ethan on his behalf. If he were to intervene now, he would discourage Caleb, so he remained silent. This was his trust in Ethan. Ethan almost chuckled, clearing his throat and subtly taking sides. He declared that the court was a place for serious deliberation, and such bickering was undignified. He ordered the right censor to report to him after the assembly. He then asked if anyone had any other urgent business. With none, he dismissed the court. After the assembly, Caleb purposefully ambled towards the citadel. Jasper hurried to catch up. They huddled together, speaking softly for a long time. Caleb's face still bore the mocking expression he had directed at Jasper's father, but his internal displeasure had somewhat dissipated. Jasper squeezed Caleb's hand, then quickly departed towards the western side of the city. Caleb continued towards the citadel and encountered Lord Commander Ryan waiting by the roadside. Caleb, still annoyed with his mentor for not returning home, ignored him, walking past as if he hadn't seen him. Ryan, amused, caught him by the collar, then walked alongside him towards the citadel, asking what was bothering him. Caleb sulked, refusing to speak. Ryan, never one for excessive words, walked with him in silence until they reached the entrance of the citadel. There, he quietly told Caleb that he loved Jasper and he, Ryan, loved the High King. Before turning to leave, Ryan patted Caleb's shoulder, admonishing him not to anger the High King as he worked tirelessly. Caleb, both angry and bewildered, entered the High King's study. He knelt in greeting, but remained silent. He had worried for his mentor and had tried every means to get him out of the palace. Impeaching the High King's adoptive father was merely the first step in his plan. But his mentor clearly loved the High King, and Jasper had also confirmed they were genuinely in love. This left Caleb uncertain how to proceed. For Caleb, putting himself in his mentor's shoes, concluded that if he were Ryan and Jasper were the High King, he too would not leave Jasper. However, if his mentor continued this way, not only his reputation but his very life could be in danger. Since the beginning of recorded history, many emperors had claimed profound love, but how many had truly loved only one person, unwavering in their devotion? High King Ethan usually stayed with Ryan in his private study. He rarely used this formal study. Sitting in the official chair, he felt a strange sense of incompleteness, and at first he said nothing. Both remained silent. Ethan had expected Caleb to burst in, ready to vehemently defend his mentor. Instead, Caleb remained silent. Like Ryan, Ethan preferred not to discuss private matters with outsiders. Since Caleb remained quiet for so long, Ethan broke the silence, offering him a promise. Caleb abruptly looked up, staring at Ethan like a loyal hound. Ethan's voice was tense and deep. He promised that if, one day, Caleb's mentor wished to leave the Citadel and return to his own estate, Ethan would never force him to stay. He would also ensure his safety and a life free from conflict. Caleb forcefully struck his head against the ground, acknowledging the High King's word. Ethan promised he would never break his word. It was unclear how long the two had remained in silent contemplation. Just as Ethan finished speaking, they heard Ryan knock impatiently on the study door from outside, calling them out for dinner. Days later, the adoptive father, urged by the regional censor, submitted a self-reflection report, promising not to take any more consorts. As High King Ethan finished reading it, Lord Commander Ryan tossed the report aside, preferring not to see it. Ryan asked Ethan if he hadn't asked the regional censor to convey the message for his adoptive father to return to the capital as soon as possible. Ethan explained, with a hint of exasperation, that the situation in the Western Marches was unstable and changes might be imminent. His adoptive father, perhaps fearing Ethan would restrict his freedom, had adamantly refused to return to the capital, once again citing filial piety to deflect Ethan. However, Ethan couldn't simply issue a decree to force him back to the capital, as that would alert potential agitators and destabilize the Western Marches. Ethan lowered his eyes, stating that he had people watching him, and hoped there would be no trouble. Ryan gave a knowing, cool smile, and let the matter drop. Under Lord Commander Ryan's gentle urging, High King Ethan arranged an outing with Liam. He took Liam to the western part of the city. Chief Minister Marcus, the more he replayed Caleb's accusation from that day, the more he felt something was amiss. As he pondered, he suddenly recalled all of mystic advisor Silas's past pronouncements. About auspicious love, a queen performing royal rituals, and a prosperous destiny. Then, comparing these to his daily observations of the High King and Lord Commander Ryan, a sudden realization struck him. The servants at the chief minister's estate saw him frown in thought for several days, then suddenly jolt upright, cursing furiously towards the Bureau of Celestial Affairs, calling Silas a charlatan. Marcus then changed into his official robes and rushed towards the palace. Though he hadn't yet formulated his exact words, he knew he had to offer counsel. This involved the High King and Lord Commander Ryan. Caleb and Jasper's antics were one thing. Caleb was naturally eccentric and Jasper was gay. But Caleb had even subtly criticized the High King that day. What did this imply? It meant even Caleb believed there would be no good outcome if Ethan and Ryan were entangled. No matter how fond Marcus was of Ryan, his loyalty to Ethan always came first. Furthermore, in the long run, this arrangement would adversely affect both of them, inappropriate both publicly and privately. Marcus absolutely refused to witness the day their relationship fractured or began to disrupt court affairs. High King Ethan had always been composed. Marcus had watched him grow up since he was a boy and had never seen him act rebelliously. Ethan had always been excessively well-behaved. Marcus had never imagined that when Ethan finally made a mistake, it would be such a grand one. In life and in conduct, there were things one should do and things one should not. Many people spent their entire lives unable to distinguish between them, but Ethan had always been remarkably proper since childhood. How could he, after ascending to the throne, engage in such a relationship? Marcus racked his brain but could not comprehend it. From his estate to the Aurelian palace, Marcus fretted, complained, sighed, and lamented. Upon arriving at the palace gates, he inquired with a royal guard and learned that the High King had left the palace with Prince Liam, heading west. Hearing Liam's name, Marcus felt a slight reassurance. He knew High King Ethan was a person who found it extremely difficult to grow close to others, and once he committed to someone or something, he was unshakable. It was fortunate, he thought, that Ethan already had Liam before becoming entangled with Ryan. Otherwise, Aurelia might not even have an heir. The more Marcus thought, the more anxious he became. He bowed respectfully to the royal guard, forcing a smile, stating that the matter was urgent and required an immediate audience with the High King. He politely asked the guard to lead the way. The chief minister's politeness startled the on-duty royal guard. He quickly acknowledged his duty, got into a carriage, directed the driver, and headed west. The westernmost district of the capital was relatively poor and chaotic. It was a place where commoners gathered, and its affordable land made it a preferred landing spot for small, external businesses. With a diverse population, disturbances were common. Fortunately, the prefect of Viridian City and the commander of the Royal Guard were capable individuals, so despite minor skirmishes, no major incidents had occurred. High King Ethan and Liam stood in a corner of a large courtyard, watching children playing. Liam, accustomed to the formality of addressing his father as Your Majesty, faltered when trying to say father outside the palace. What was this place, he wondered. It was a very spacious courtyard, enclosed by walls on two sides, with large, single-story buildings on the other two. It wasn't newly built. It seemed to have been purchased. Two old, thick ginkgo trees stood in the yard. It was early spring, and their fan-shaped green leaves filtered the warm sunlight, rustling softly in the breeze. Older children played with younger ones. A slender woman laundered bedding, assisted by several older children. As Liam walked through, he also saw children learning to read and write under the guidance of a female teacher in two partitioned rooms within the main building, while laborers repaired damaged desks and chairs. High King Ethan explained that Ryan, like Liam, had been a wanderer in his youth. Therefore, following an ancient precedent of children's welfare institutions, this children's haven had been established. Ethan had conceived this plan long before relocating to the capital and had secured the location beforehand. As a former orphan, Liam understood the profound significance of this endeavor. He genuinely bowed to Ethan, praising his father's compassion. He then inquired about the conditions for entry, how the expenses were covered, and why such an initiative wasn't implemented throughout the regions. These were excellent questions, so Ethan smiled and answered them one by one. The capital, being Aurelia's heart, did not have an overwhelming number of abandoned or orphaned children. Every effort was made to take in any child under 10. Life at the Children's Haven was austere, not as lucrative as running errands in coffee houses or eateries. Therefore, older children who wished to leave were not prevented from doing so. The expenses came from Ethan's personal treasury. Due to various shortcomings, it was not yet suitable for broader regional implementation. There was a concern it could become a means of illicit enrichment, with good intentions leading to harm. Thus, this aspect was still under review by the Academy of Scholars, who were tasked with devising a workable set of rules, serving as a test for the new junior fellows. It was a multifaceted approach. Liam nodded repeatedly, then offered to contribute his year's salary to the Children's Haven. High King Ethan, who had just noticed the approaching Marcus, chuckled softly at Liam's offer. He asked why Liam was concerned about the Children's Haven becoming a source of illicit gain, pointing out that Liam's annual salary alone could fund the construction of many such institutions. He advised Liam to consult with his arithmetic teacher and to reflect carefully on the matter, then write an essay about it. Liam, realizing his naive assumption, immediately agreed. Chief Minister Marcus, observing from the side, felt a mix of emotions. First, he was deeply reassured by Liam's promising future, noting his quiet maturity and sense of duty, so similar to Ethan's own. Second, he was delighted by the loving and respectful relationship between father and son, a relief given Ethan's long years without a true family. Finally, Marcus couldn't help but think of Lord Commander Ryan again. Marcus had urged Ethan to consider marriage for years, but Ethan had been solely focused on rebuilding Aurelia. The sudden appearance of a deceased wife and young son had already shocked Marcus once. Then, after his ascension, Ethan had refused to add anyone to his harem, immersing himself in state affairs, making Marcus, who had been warned by Silas, worry that Ethan, devoted to his deceased wife, would never accept another woman. Now, this entanglement with Lord Commander Ryan was a complete thunderbolt. Marcus spent every day in the council hall and frequently visited the citadel for urgent matters. From his observations, he knew Ethan and Ryan got along exceptionally well, and he had even been pleased that Ryan had finally seemed to curb his wilder impulses. Now, he felt like cursing himself for his blindness. No matter how harmonious their relationship, Lord Commander Ryan was a man, and a hero whose achievements outshone all others. Marcus continued his reflections, sighing with resignation. Ryan, he thought, was perfect in every way but one, his gender. Publicly, Ethan was devoted to state affairs, and Ryan was intelligent and capable. Not only could they discuss important matters, but Ryan had also offered frank counsel several times, indicating a deep understanding and rapport between ruler and subject. Privately, Ethan found it very difficult to grow close to others, and Ryan had a reputation for being overly fastidious and reserved. Yet, they had lived harmoniously in the citadel for over a year, so there was undoubtedly affection between them. If only Lord Commander Ryan had an identical sister, Marcus would have personally acted as matchmaker, arranging this perfect union for Ethan. Alas, Ethan gently helped Liam into the carriage, then turned to Marcus, who had followed silently for a long time, and asked what was on his mind. Ethan, in fact, had anticipated this. When Caleb had accused his adoptive father, the entire court had surely assumed Caleb was simply baiting Jasper's father. But the meticulous Marcus, he knew, would likely discern the deeper meaning. So, Marcus's visit was expected, but his immediate restraint, rather than a direct confrontation, had surprised Ethan. What surprised Ethan even more was that Marcus, after following him silently with a troubled expression, finally posed a question. He quoted, "No crime is greater than coveting, no calamity greater than discontent, no fault greater than the desire for gain. Therefore, to know satisfaction is to always be satisfied." What did this mean? This quote from the ancient philosopher's writings would be clear to anyone educated in classical texts. Yet Marcus had chosen this moment to ask Ethan. In simpler terms, it meant that indulging in selfish desires was the gravest sin, insatiable greed the worst calamity, and that true contentment came from knowing when enough was enough and having no cravings. This could be interpreted in two completely different ways. One was to Ethan not to indulge himself, not to become more stubbornly deluded than he already was. The other was Marcus taking a step back. Nothing in this world was perfect. Since Ryan was a man, and since Ethan himself was happy, then even if Marcus was not entirely pleased with this near-perfect relationship, he could not force the issue. Ethan, appreciating Marcus's tact, replied with a smile, citing another parable. The parable of the river fish. The parable of the river fish. You are not a fish. How do you know the joy of fish? Marcus smiled ruefully, bowed, and returned to his carriage, fiercely instructing the driver to hurry to the palace. The driver, not understanding why the chief minister was rushing back to the palace when the High King was right there, nevertheless obeyed his superior. Thus, while Ethan and Liam's carriage was still halfway back, Marcus had already burst into the Bureau of Celestial Affairs. He was remarkably agile. Mystic advisor Silas, completely oblivious, was still scrutinizing his haphazardly cast predictions, muttering, "Wildfire burns the land. Heaven's will is clear." Heaven's will is clear? Only for the greatest injustices did one speak of heaven's will being clear. Surely there were no unredressed grievances now? He then sighed over another scrap of paper, remarking on the unusual occurrence of 3 imperial names appearing in such a short passage, truly unfathomable. He then chuckled to himself, finding it amusing like a family of 3. Marcus, hearing the charlatan's monologue, delivered a flying kick from behind, sending Silas sprawling, his whisk flying. "Who dares?" Silas, enraged, turned to see his crore, and immediately felt wronged. What was that for? He protested that even though he owed money, given their long-standing acquaintance, he shouldn't be physically assaulted. He felt even more indignant, accusing Marcus of assaulting him in broad daylight within the palace, questioning if there was any law left. Marcus simply snorted, still feeling unappeased. He kicked Silas's small divination table, sending it tumbling, and then stormed out. When Lord Commander Ryan entered, Silas was sitting stunned, cradling his whisk, with his divination table overturned. Ryan asked what had happened. Silas, aggrieved, claimed Marcus had assaulted him in the palace. Ryan laughed, remarking that Silas's idleness had finally provoked even the chief minister. Silas, having narrowly escaped being reassigned to Arthur's vacant position a few days prior, disliked the topic and merely grumbled. Ryan then invited him, telling him he would take him to play. Silas's eyes lit up, and he happily followed Ryan. Ryan led him to the Citadel's grand study, gesturing to the war room map table. He asked if Silas hadn't wanted to play a simulated battle with him, challenging him to a few rounds. Playing against Aurelia's war god, indeed. Silas rolled up his sleeves and picked up a bamboo pen. Ryan pointed to the Western Marches, stating they would fight there. Another regional censor had died in the Western Marches. Why another? The censor before the last, who had not even reached his post, had been killed by vagrants. The previous censor, before the end of the second year of Aurelia's founding, had fallen from a mountain path and died. And the current regional censor, after directly advising High King Ethan's adoptive father, had gone to investigate the rumored death of the Wind clan leader, Flora, only to drown in a river outside Rosemont, unable to swim. Clearly, being a regional censor in the Western Marches was a dangerous job. If it was dangerous for them, it was even more so for their subordinates in various districts and prefectures. In fact, the Western Marches was the territory where High King Ethan's policies, such as encouraging farming and returning profits to the people, met the most resistance. And it also had the fastest turnover of censors. The previous governor of the Western Marches had argued that their region, with its rugged mountains and treacherous waters, was unsuitable for talented outsiders unfamiliar with the terrain, who were prone to accidents. He suggested appointing local respected figures, as they knew the land, were paragons of virtue and trustworthy. The fact that this man dared to submit such a ridiculous proposal to Ethan earned him the silent admiration of the entire court for his suicidal bravery. The censor's duty was to oversee officials. What were these respected local figures? They were local gentry who, under the guise of benevolence and propriety, oppressed the poor, their hands stained with countless injustices. Appointing them to oversee officials was like assigning jackals to guard sheep from wolves. This governor of the Western Marches, who had submitted his argument at the beginning of the year, was swiftly summoned to the capital by Ethan within 7 days, publicly shamed and executed. His successor was a military hero named Duncan, a distant cousin of a prominent general. And now, yet another regional censor had died in the Western Marches. This time, it wasn't just the death of a censor. The circumstances surrounding Wind clan leader Flora's illness and death were highly suspicious. High King Ethan's preferred successor, Flora's son, had not yet been confirmed as the new leader. News from the adoptive father's estate, which was usually reported daily, had been delayed for 2 days. The Western Marches, it seemed, was on the brink of turmoil. High King Ethan's pen hovered over the decree for a long moment before he finally looked at Ryan, asking if he wished to lead the troops. Ryan chuckled, urging him not to hesitate, but to issue the decree. Mystic advisor Silas found himself banished from the Bureau of Celestial Affairs, kneeling in the main chamber of the Citadel, weeping openly at the imperial decree. He had been thoroughly tricked by Lord Commander Ryan. High King Ethan, too exasperated to engage, threatened him directly, asking what was wrong. Silas, wiping tears from his eyes, forced a sycophantic grin, his face creasing into a web of wrinkles. He declared his unwavering loyalty, stating that he, as a humble general, accepted the decree and swore not to return until the western marches were pacified. Ethan, suppressing a laugh, shook his head, yet still instructed him to return safely. Having failed to serve together in a previous life, Ethan had no desire to repeat that mistake. Ethan's instructions, imbued with the High King's genuine concern, made Silas feel a touch of remorse for his past indolence. He then solemnly affirmed his commitment, brandishing his whisk. And so, mystic advisor Silas, having gathered an elite force, departed from the capital's outskirts. His departure was not discreet, yet not overtly ostentatious, witnessed by Lord Commander Ryan, Chief Minister Marcus, and others. Ryan, clad in light white robes, watched the receding cavalry and gleaming weapons fade into the twilight of late spring, lost in thought. Since realizing the nature of the High King's relationship with Ryan, Chief Minister Marcus had felt a certain awkwardness around Ryan. Ryan, feigning ignorance, had ignored it. Today, however, as Marcus saw his old friend off to war, and then glanced back at Aurelia's war god, confined to the palace, his heart softened. He initiated a conversation, asking what Ryan was thinking about. Ryan raised an eyebrow, smiling casually. He said he was just worried that the stallion might cause trouble for the charlatan. Silas had mingled in the palace for over a year, forging connections. He had forcibly divined the fortunes of eunuchs and palace maids alike. Even the magnificent stallion had developed an unlikely friendship with him across species boundaries. For this expiation, Silas had persistently begged to ride the warhorse, and after teasing him for a few days, Ryan had generously lent it. However, now that he had actually lent the horse, Ryan genuinely worried that the stallion, with its wild nature, might cause some mischief for Silas. Marcus knew this was merely an evasion, but upon reflection, he considered it poignant that even the stallion was going to war. He then feigned disdain for Silas, comforting Ryan by saying that Silas was a trouble magnet himself. An extra horse wouldn't make much difference. Ryan offered a perfunctory smile, then chatted with Marcus as they returned to the palace. Marcus headed to the council hall for deliberations. Ryan, with nothing pressing to do today, leisurely walked towards the citadel and encountered Chief Censor Caleb emerging from the royal medical ward. Caleb quietly called out, "Mentor." Ryan found it amusing how cautious Caleb was around him today. He lazily asked what was wrong now. Caleb looked around, then leaned closer to complain that Jasper had talked back to him. He found such public displays of affection quite annoying. Ryan asked, in a very flat tone, what Jasper had argued about, hoping Caleb wouldn't miss his lack of interest. Caleb, unperturbed, continued, stating that yesterday he had called his mentor the High King's consort, and Jasper had agreed, saying Caleb had finally understood. But then Jasper had retorted that if Caleb understood that, he should also know that Caleb was his consort, not the other way around. By the end, Caleb seemed genuinely upset. Ryan interrupted, wanting to roll up his sleeves, asking what they meant by both thinking he was Ethan's consort. Caleb looked at him as if he couldn't believe Ryan hadn't understood something so simple. Ryan felt a strong urge to reprimand his unruly apprentice. Caleb meticulously explained that when a woman married into a man's family, she became his consort, caring for her husband and raising children. He then noted that his mentor resided in the citadel, while Jasper resided at the Lord Commander's estate. It was, he concluded, perfectly clear. Ryan scoffed. What kind of twisted logic was that? What about a man who married into his wife's family? Ryan instinctively retorted, then realized Caleb had trapped him. He then questioned why two men would apply a woman's title to themselves. Caleb gravely explained that it concerned the authority of the household head. This little firebrand understood internal family politics, Ryan thought, chuckling. He played along, asking if, in Caleb's household, he, as the head, was responsible for all expenses, for anything missing or broken, for all food and provisions. Caleb proudly affirmed that he managed the entire Lord Commander's estate, ensuring it was well maintained for Ryan. Ryan, with a mischievous glint in his eye, decided to stir up trouble for Jasper. He patted Caleb's shoulder and told him to inform Jasper that his mentor said Jasper was Caleb's consort. Caleb chuckled soundlessly, a wide, serious grin spreading across his face, and happily departed. Ryan shook his head, smiling. Truly, innocent people found happiness easily. As dusk settled, High King Ethan, unusually, returned to the citadel without needing to be urged. The expression on his face immediately told Ryan what he was thinking. No doubt he was still worried that Ryan secretly yearned for battle, and had probably prepared a lengthy speech to soothe his concerns. Even with subordinates and decent colleagues thanks to Ethan, Ryan inwardly didn't care much for others. Even if Marcus occasionally seemed disdainful of his relationship with Ethan, it was inconsequential to Ryan. In this world, the only person Ryan truly cared about was Ethan. It was one thing for Marcus to be cautious around him, but for Ethan to be the same, Ryan was genuinely frustrated. Before Ethan could speak, Ryan raised a hand, interrupting him. He declared that if Ethan was about to launch into a long, absurd speech about whether or not he would go to war, then he should stop. In truth, the moment Ryan realized how deeply Ethan cared for him, he knew he couldn't leave. He could perhaps return to his estate for a day or two, slowly helping Ethan to be less anxious, and Ryan possessed the resolve to do so. But to leave the capital for a distant campaign, Ryan knew he couldn't. Though the cause remained unclear, Ryan understood that the wounds etched into Ethan from past experiences could only be healed with more time and constant companionship. Loving Ethan, Ryan had no other choice, nor could he make any other choice. Ethan, too, felt helpless. What could he do when the other person refused to be cared for? So, after their usual dinner, Ethan remembered that Lakeview County had sent several jars of wine some days ago, called Lakeview Nectar. It was a seasonal wine, made from mandarins specially grown on Lakeview Mountain, known for its clear color and sweet, delicate flavor. Once the clay seal was broken, the rich aroma of mandarins filled the air. Ethan ordered an outdoor table to be set on the veranda. When Steward Miles had finished arranging it, the table held not only the Lakeview nectar but also several small dishes and fresh fruits. Ryan, having been forced by Marcus to build up his alcohol tolerance after joining Aurelia's side, and starting with strong spirits, generally had a neutral opinion on alcohol. But this Lakeview nectar, being a special tribute, was surely exceptional. Ryan tasted it and a smile touched his lips. It was delicious. Ethan's expression softened slightly. He was still dwelling on Ryan not having requested to go to war. But since Ryan refused to be consoled, Ethan could only sip his wine, lost in thought, almost as if drowning his sorrows. Suddenly, his hand felt warm, a touch that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Ethan looked up to see Ryan had taken his jade cup and lay back against his lap. Ryan, his head finding a comfortable spot on Ethan's lap with practiced ease, seriously stated that in a typical civilian marriage, no couple lived in such constant, careful worry for each other. He questioned if this was any way to live. Ethan's brow relaxed slightly, and to his surprise, he wanted to laugh. Ryan was usually so detached, so otherworldly. Even though he constantly urged Ethan to eat, Ethan still felt he was like an elusive crane. Ethan would bet that Ryan still had no idea how much wealth he possessed. He simply didn't care about such things. For such a person to ask Ethan if this was any way to live struck Ethan as inexplicably funny, but also warmed his heart. General Ryan, the impulsive one, was now sharing a life with him. Ethan leaned down, kissing Ryan's lips lightly, but then countered that he knew Ryan wanted to go out, and yet, for his sake, he hadn't even mentioned it. He had even discussed strategy with Silas for days, preparing him for the campaign. If Ethan didn't remember this, he would be heartless, wouldn't he? Ryan let out a frustrated growl from his throat. He then forcefully pressed Ethan to the floor. The veranda was made entirely of wood, neither cold nor hot. Ethan, within the citadel, was not so bound by formalities. His hair had long been unbound, his jade crown removed, and his hair tied in a simple bun. Now, with Ryan pressing down on him, his long hair fanned across the reddish-brown wooden planks. Moonlight illuminated him, making him appear every inch a handsome high king. Ryan, captivated by his charm, felt his irritation dissipate. After all, Ethan was concerned for him. He touched Ethan's chin, patiently explaining that remembering was fine, that he wouldn't let Ethan forget. But, he continued, if they were to constantly dwell on what one had sacrificed for the other, and what one had endured for the other over time, it would inevitably lead to a formal, distant respect. Was that how Ethan wanted their life to be? Ethan, embracing the man above him, looked confused, starting to say, but Ryan interrupted, saying there were no buts. Ethan started again, however, Ryan again cut him off, stating there were no howevers either. Ethan, silenced, chuckled. He managed to finish his thought, asking if, as he slowly forgot Ryan's sacrifices and became self-absorbed, lacking in consideration, would their life still be sustainable? So, he concluded what was wrong with him remembering. Ryan feigned surprise, asking if Ethan thought he was some meek, long-suffering saint. He warned the High King that he was too naive. He had already warned Ethan that he held grudges. If others crossed him, he would retaliate. Ryan then raised an eyebrow, and then, more seriously, added that Ethan shouldn't think so poorly of himself. Ethan was never purely self-serving. Ethan blinked. Before him was Ryan, and above Ryan, the clear moonlit sky. Ryan's every gesture, every word, was meant to ease Ethan's worries. Ethan loved him so much it ached, yet his heart was full of joy. The light fabric of Ryan's clothes rubbed against the royal robes, and amidst their shared breaths and hushed intertwined sounds, a soft rustling filled the air.